Recording.
Okay, so with Scott, Tina and I, we have a quorum. John sent me a message early this morning and said he may or may not make it. He was in Logan. And I don't know what that means. I assume he means Logan Airport rather than Logan, Utah. But with John, you never know. So we can get started. Scott, have you had a chance to look at the minutes that Tina had sent?
No, I haven't.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
It's a
My
fairly,
fault.
if it's a fairly short set of minutes if you want to take a look at it.
I just got him 5:07.
Right.
Looks good to me.
Okay. All those in favor of accepting the minutes of the 13 April meeting, say aye.
Hi.
Aye.
Aye, okay, accepted. According to the agenda, the next item is supposed to be talking about this USDA visit, but I'm gonna move that kind of to the end of the meeting so we can get to some more substantive things. I did want to tell Tina and Chris and Elaine that I met with the Perry Select Board on Tuesday evening. Obviously, Scott was there, and hopefully he'll correct me every time I say something wrong. But more than anything else, I think it was an information meeting that the Select Board hadn't really heard from me or anybody else on the committee since we started. So it's probably time for me to do that. So I explained that we had spent most of the time of our existence talking to the ISPs and utility companies and trying to collate their information and in some cases drill down and re-interview some of them, for example, Spectrum and CCI. And a lot of the discussion was on what really are the possibilities, and what I outlined to them is that there really seem to be only 4 different possibilities: the 2 incumbents, Spectrum and CCI, and the 2 companies that are offering kind of the town-owned model, Axiom and DBU/Pioneer. And we spent quite a bit of time talking about what does that entail in terms of commitments for the town of Perry. And one of the things that I kind of got a sense for, although it wasn't stated specifically, is that if our decision is to go with the town-owned model, then that's going to bring up situations that really the town hasn't had to deal with before, in terms of taking out substantial loans to cover the deficit between the monies that you can get from grants and the actual cost of doing the build. And I don't think we reached, any decision one way or another, because at this point it's all hypothetical discussion. But my sense is that the less we can make this cost for Perry, the better off it's going to be. Was there anything else that we talked about, Scott?
No, not really. I mean, we touch base on talking to other towns and getting their feedback on things like that, which I've
Right.
kind of been doing through basically friends that I have in other towns, basically. But No, that's pretty much all we really talked about. I know money is going to be a big selling issue with the selectmen.
Right.
It's all on the, well, yeah, you know.
It always is. I mean, I continue to make my personal commitment that none of this was going to affect anyone's property taxes, and I still feel that way. Any questions? The other thing we talked about a little bit was what process we will need to go through once we do make a choice, and that's pretty clear. It's going to involve involving the select board at the approval process, but also calling a town meeting and allowing the town to learn about what we have kind of chosen to do, what path we want to go. And then hopefully they will approve it, and then we could go forward. And I guess there's a two week waiting time between when you announce the meeting and when you can hold it. But outside of that, I don't think it's any more complicated than that.
No.
All right. Well, let's go to CCI's comments. These are the comments that I got from Simon Thorne a couple of weeks ago. And I think both Chris and Elaine have had the opportunity to look at them too. And I appreciate you doing that. So if we just want to go through them, let me get a share thing here. So what I hit the share screen first. Yeah.
Yes, right.
There we go. Can you see it?
Nope, you got to have your. Oh, here we go.
Just have to hit the magic green button. That's all.
There you go.
Okay. All right. So there were 6 questions that I sent to them. A couple of them are kind of redundant, but if you don't mind, we can just walk through them and talk about them a little bit. Let's see what else we got here. The first 2 questions involve the map that Fidium provided that showed where the RDOF areas were. And just to remind you, see if I can get it. Let's see if I want to share this one instead. How do
Then
I get?
that stop your share.
Yeah, I'll stop the share on the other one.
Yep, and then pull up what you're trying to show, and go back to sharing screen.
Where's the share screen?
Oh, that green button that you love.
Oh, I just made this big though, so I can't see it. There we go. Okay. Share. All right. So the yellow boundaries here are the town lines. They go all the way down to Pleasant Point down here, and whatever we call that, and then there's Perry itself. So all of the red triangles are the RDOF designated homes, I guess, or buildings. So all of these are not eligible for funding by anybody else. And all the green ones are eligible. So according to the number here, there are 561 establishments that are eligible for funding. And that's kind of the question I asked. And that's what he said. So it says they represent all locations of Perry. And we have found that mapping is not 100% accurate in any given area of the state of Maine. Consolidated shows 653. So the numbers are going to go back and forth, but what it does is it kind of tells us where the major roads are in Perry, and almost all of them are available for funding and available for broadband. The second question I asked was strictly personal because it was about Gin Cove. Gin Cove is right here. And if you look, you've got these red triangles basically on the on the east side of Gin Cove, and then green on the west side. And I asked him why. And what he said was the mapping is correct as the triangles show the location that would not receive any funding because they're covered by RDOF. One side of the road using census blocks, the federal data shows locations as unserved, and I assume that's the red triangles, and the other side as having service. Well, that's nonsense. I mean, Gin Cove Road has one set of power poles, and houses on both sides are being served, so I don't really know what that means or why they did it, but I don't care. He answered my question. So kind of my bottom line is that from the Fed's point of view, and probably from NCA's point of view, almost all of Perry is available for competitive grants or whatever. So regardless of the fact that Spectrum claims it owns a lot of the usage in Perry, the feds don't care. So everything's available. So the third question, and I'm going to go back here.
And Ray, there's one other piece on that mapping portion. I don't know what, Jim had that sort of boiled down to in terms of filters. There's other data attached to those locations that it may be eligible under a certain speed tier, and depending on how you have your filtering set in and what data sets they have, kind of like what we see in Eastport too. On first glance, it looks like an eligible location, but only under certain parameters. So again, I'd be cautious on where eligible sites are versus the actual data when you get to that point, because these maps are literally changing on a weekly basis.
Is that kind of looking at the unserved versus the underserved populations?
That map, based on what I've seen in Vetro and stuff like that, I don't think it had anything it's just a location map, essentially.
That's all it is. Okay.
Yeah, it's not a speed base. Now, when you get into other data sets like that MCA has, they can see what we call the mesh, which is broken down by speed offerings by providers in the area, which changes drastically what eligibility is based on those. And again, they're supposed to be making some more of this more public pretty soon, whether that happens or not, which will help kind of guide things. But you can basically just kind of in your head, if you know that Spectrum's in the area, when it comes down to crunch time, it's probably not an eligible location. But again, I can't caution enough that this stuff is really still kind of not set in stone, and there's an awful lot still to kind of factor in before you would get to that point where a determination of grant or no grant approval, before you ever get there's a lot that's going to sort of change. It's a very shifty landscape.
Okay, your points are well taken. I'll try to be more careful how I say these things.
No, this is just so you guys kind of have a sense in your head of kind of what everybody's going through across the state. And it's not just Maine either by any stretch. The FCC map in general is very well known, problematic, and they're working on it. But for you guys specifically, just keep in mind that until you really start getting into this, I wouldn't kind of count any of it as yes, no, concrete or other.
Right. I kind of remember you saying something maybe a couple of weeks ago that you were waiting to get certain licenses or accesses.
Yeah, so right now I have access to the same Vetro instance, sort of the cloud software that everybody else uses. I've gotten approval for the FCC mesh license that we were just talking about, where I can actually see speed layers by provider according to their mapping. It's still not accurate, but it does give you a better idea of what they will consider eligible or non-eligible, factual or not.
Right.
But they still have to send me the data files, and all of this stuff is just a very time consuming process. So I don't have access yet, but I kind of know, where the areas are by knowledge of the infrastructure.
Okay. Now, this effort that MCA is going through right now to collect information from users, I don't know if it's strictly speed data, but performance or whatever else. Is that information ultimately going to make its way into the Vetro mapping?
Yeah, there's a bunch of different things that go into that data gathering, and I finally had a chance to catch up on some of the meetings I had recently. But as part of the digital equity planning, the BAP, the Broadband Access Action Plan, whatever, they're doing what's also called a state level challenge to the FCC maps, which is just a more organized and systematic way of challenging, this is not an eligible location, or this is an eligible location. So they're going to be doing that on a very large scale basis, as a state.
Wow.
That again is going to take some time. I don't know that for anything prior, probably mid 2024, if that data would be useful for anybody, looking to go through this process. I just don't think it's going to happen that fast.
Okay.
And then there's also other things where states, municipalities, individuals can challenge locations. You can always do that, and we can definitely provide you with information if you want to, look at doing things like that. You can challenge on an individual basis. I don't know if the return on investment of time is necessarily worthwhile, but it is helpful. It definitely helps the maps, but on a resource assessment, I don't know if I would spend precious resources on it.
Right.
So having spoken with Ray earlier this week, I think what Ray is referring to, Chris, is the Maine Broadband Coalition speed tests,
Oh yeah,
where community members can test their speeds, and Maine Broadband Coalition records those. But people can also report, say, like on a Facebook page or something.
yeah,
At my house, I have speeds of 20/4, and just kind of
sure.
anecdotal data on that score.
Yep, and it's a valuable tool. It helped them with a lot of different things, but right from the get-go, they were very honest about it. That is absolutely not admissible data in any shape, as far as changing the determination by the FCC of an eligible or ineligible location. And the basic reason for it, just for your, so is that if you were getting less than what you should be getting, or they're saying, it could be a home problem, it could be an equipment problem. That's their sort of loophole to get out of that. So customer generated or site generated data of performance measures is not at this time admissible. It's simply, do you have a physical connection outside versus what they do? And then if you do, what is the speed tier that provider says is available?
Right.
It is anecdotal, but it does help people see what
Yep.
they're paying for versus
Sure.
what's actually happening at home.
Yep.
Okay. So are you seeing the CCI comments again?
Mhm.
Okay, good. So let's move on to the third one. The third one was, my question was regarding possible build business models. Two options were presented: a grant funded model and a bond funded model. That's their terminology, not mine. In the grant model, CCI would own the entire network and Perry would have no ownership responsibilities. Recognizing the need for Perry to commit between $15 and $150 per location, which comes out to be $8,400 to $84,000 for 561. Does CCI bear the remaining cost of the bill? that is, are there any other financial commitments for Perry in the grant model? And Simon responded, there are no other financial commitments to the town of Perry. The remainder of the bill would be funded by CCI and the Maine Connectivity Authority. Now, I thought that was kind of an important statement from him, because it gave me, at least in my mind, the idea that as far as path of least resistance from the point of view of the cost, this would probably be the most inexpensive commitment for Perry going forward. And what we're, just to go forward a little bit, we're going to try to get Simon to talk to us next week and try to drill down and get specific commitments from CCI about what they really propose to do and what it really would cost Perry. And hopefully some of these things, like this $15 and $150 per location thing, could be negotiated in some way.
The other thing that might be referring to, and Simon and I had a couple conversations a while back. He actually was a really good source of information regarding this piece. I don't know if he's saying that is the piece after, like, sort of your agreement with CCI, or if he's referring to what you would be putting in as part of the grant process, because the grant process generally requires a town input as well. Like,
Right.
I've heard numbers all over the place.
Right.
And Simon's stance is that there's sort of a max. There's a max amount before it really doesn't weigh in the process. I don't know how that applies on the internal side of MCA. Are they giving, communities that are willing to invest 50%, more weighting because it means more return on the capital that's available? That's a kind of more inner workings thing. So I'm not sure which one of those things he's referring for that sort of contribution piece, whether it's a CCI or if that's the contribution the town would have to make, meaning you would get that much less of a grant. Say it's 10% that the town's going to commit, you would get 90% of the total build cost just as part of that process. Right. Does that make sense?
Yeah, and that's my understanding, Chris, that it has everything to do with the MCA's preference, I guess.
Yep.
Because it is an option. I guess we could opt not to do it, but they said you won't get any points. If that's true, then well, we can talk about this later, but it may, if we wanted to go into a deal strictly with CCI, and they were going to not only write the proposal but submit it to whatever funding vehicle they thought was most appropriate for getting it funding in Perry, which may be, what is it, the Reach Me type of thing that's only available to the ISPs and not to towns like us. Their requirements may be completely different. But I think these are some of the types of questions that we would like to get into with Simon if we choose to go this way.
Yeah, I would assume he's referring to the Connect the Ready, only because the Reach Me is meant more for smaller sort of single pole run extensions. So there's less money available for that. So I wouldn't assume that there'd be, a path to use that for this larger project.
Okay.
So it would be the Connect the Ready, which is just, another one that can follow a couple different models.
Right. Okay. So let's move on a little bit. And the next one, it says in a bond funded model, Perry would own the backbone and CCI would own the drops and ONTs. ONT, he explained to me, because I didn't know, is the optical network terminal, which basically converts light to electricity or electrons. In this model, it appears that Perry is responsible for acquiring the funding either through bond initiatives or through grants. And he said two different types of fundings listed above are correct and would require a conversation in order to work through the details of each. One option, the town would own the network minus drops and ONTs, and the other model, the town would not. That CCI would own everything. And I asked him, the one funded model, it's not clear how Perry receives an income stream that would be needed to pay off any debts acquired in building the infrastructure. And he basically said in that scenario, CCI would take an end user fee from every subscriber who uses the network in order to pay the bond back. And I don't know how that works, but we could talk about that too. But he then committed to say, means the network could be funded with no increase in property taxes. Ta-da. And then the last thing it says, what does CCI Fidium require from Perry in order to get more detailed discussions? And he said Consolidated is interested in more detailed discussions with Perry and would welcome the conversation to better understand both models and the outlook for funding with the Maine Connectivity Authority today. So to me, that's kind of his carrot, that he'd like to follow the discussions in a more substantive way. And I think what I'd like to do is just talk a little bit about it amongst ourselves and see whether or not this is something that we ought to be pursuing. I mean, I've got my own opinions, but I want to hear yours. Sorry, I didn't hear that.
I will say, excuse me, that CCI has done builds, has been awarded MCA funding for builds in other communities and regions where there were more things. I think it would be worth talking to CCI about them adding more. Chris, I'm thinking the Greater East Grand build. And I know we're being recorded, but there was a lot of benefits to the regions that came with that.
Oh, gotcha.
Yeah, a lot of benefits that came with that for the communities involved.
Yeah,
So,
I mean, for the East Grand, especially that project was, put out at such a large scale. There's literally, maybe one or two companies that could even, consider taking that on. CCI being one of them. I personally, I would absolutely continue conversations with CCI. Both models are interesting, and there'll be pros and cons to both. When you start talking bond, you're hitting right at the heart of what Scott, started off with. The money is the thing, and regardless of what anybody says at a meeting, from a like if it's Simon or anybody else, people say no new taxes type of thing all the time. Whether your town is going to hear that and believe them, is another matter. That's a relationship I don't know anything about. But it is hard to believe people if they say, hey, we're going to take out a loan for $500,000 or whatever it is, and it's not going to cost anybody a dime. That even if it's true, it's a hard sell. And the other piece of the bond model, it means that you're going down the route of owning the infrastructure. And we haven't seen a lot of examples of that on smaller scales. It's just a really hard model because you have to really look at, now partnering with CCI takes a lot of that load off. It removes a lot of the things that go with it, but it really does get a lot more complicated from the contractual standpoint, insurance, just a lot of things come with owning a network. It just does. But there's also benefits. So it hasn't been a super successful model on a small scale, which is why things like Down East Broadband Utility or BUDS and all these other utility district ideas and models came up, because then you're starting to share resources and costs and burdens, and it becomes more manageable. If it's just Perry as a standalone unit, not saying that it is, but if that's the way it went, I'd have concerns about a municipally owned project just for those reasons.
Do we have enough experience, Chris, statewide on these town-owned models
No.
to come to any conclusions? We don't, huh?
The answer is no in the, for a short answer. DBU is, from everything I've seen so far, doing very good with their model. It's very early into it. For any of these models, it's new everywhere. I mean, utility districts have been around for a long time, but in terms of the communication space, it's just a little bit different. The financials and things like that may work exactly the same, but the actual maintaining of a communications network and things like that is just a very different thing. And it takes resources like multiple towns, like we were talking about, or big partners to even make it remotely feasible. And even then, it's a little tougher sell.
Interesting.
I think it's important to note as well, I have not seen the Connect the Ready grant application, but as far as, excuse me, community contribution, I would totally expect the median income rate or poverty level in a particular community or grantee would definitely weigh in as far as what a community could afford for a kick in of, you've got there 8,400, between 8,400 and 84,000. So I can only assume that that has got to be based on income levels within a community or region. That's a pretty wide berth there. I mean, pretty wide span, rather.
Does MCA have access to that type of demographic information from the populations of towns?
That's just US Census information, so
what I
absolutely they
thought.
would. Yeah,
Yeah, I thought
absolutely they
so.
would.
Okay.
But if I have not seen the Connect the Ready application, so whether they're using median or poverty rate or whatever, I can't speak to that. But that's just straight up census data is all that is.
Okay.
Not hard to access at all. But which piece they're using to determine that, or maybe it could just be the more you kick in, the merrier, the more points you get, the more weight your grant application gets. That's definitely, I think certainly that CCI has been granted quite a few. They probably know that. I would guess they'd know that information. Otherwise, we can certainly ask MCA for what they're using as a point system. What's the requirement for kicking in?
Right.
I think that that's worth investigating with CCI and MCA on this.
Okay. Are there any other comments on CCI at the moment? Scott?
No, I'm just wondering if there is more of an advantage or disadvantage, or to focus more on a bigger company like Spectrum than it is DBU. I'm really, I don't really know how to word my question, I guess. Is there more of an advantage with Spectrum, where they're a bigger company and more money to maintain an infrastructure than us trying to go with a startup company like DBU? Or I don't know. I don't know how to word the question, I guess.
No, I think that's a fair way to say it.
Yeah, absolutely, Scott. I think I understand what you're saying too, and it's like anything else you'd be entering into, and you don't have a ton of knowledge, on how this stuff, and none of us do at this level. There are certainly going to be a lot less headaches partnering in with a larger company that's established in the space. In terms of success of the project and resources going down the road, it doesn't mean a super happy outcome depending on how you pick, because right now everybody that has a cable company generally hates their service and their costs, and those things are always kind of going to be there. The big advantage to things like a utility district is, as the owners, you can control the cost of that product over the next, 50 years. So you maintain some of those controls and potentially a revenue stream as well as a capital asset on your books. So you have those, sort of benefits, whether they outweigh it or not, is really the guts to this decision making.
What about in 50 years when this infrastructure is possibly old technology or outdated, or what type, if we own the infrastructure, then what? I mean, I don't think 50 years any of us are going to care, but somebody might.
No, it's a valid point. The argument for fiber optic versus coax and things like that is that they call it future proof. I don't think that should even be a term for anything. It hasn't worked out for us so far, but it is it is likely to be there for a very long time. But people don't generally talk about the physical structure of that cable up in the air. The fact that the glass inside the cable can last almost indefinitely and may have enough capacity to get through forever, but things deteriorate, especially in Maine. And I'm not buying into a lot of the, it's just going to be there forever and that's the way to go. What you're bringing up is a point that very few people talk about, and that's the longevity of the physical plant, the actual physical structure that's out there. Now, as a a cable company or a utility, whoever owns that, some of what you're generating and for revenues goes to upgrades and replacements. You kind of keep it like a pool, like a savings account to do maintenance or whatever upgrades as they're needed. So if you're doing proper planning under that model, you shouldn't see any big giant, all of a sudden we have a useless, cable plant out there. But the potential is certainly there.
Okay, can I get rid of the shared document here? And
You're getting really good at that, Ray.
I'm getting better. All right. So there is, when I attended the Eastport weekly meeting last Tuesday, they had a representative from the Department of Agriculture, which is probably one of the principal federal level agencies that is actually funding broadband, particularly in rural communities. And I think her name was Jessica something or other.
Hamilton.
Hamilton, yeah. Simple name, I should remember it. And she basically outlined the situation of what a community needs to think about if they're going to go towards a USDA type of funding. In other words, federal funding instead of going directly to MCA. And there was a lot of talk about this and that and these and those. But one of the things that that Eastport chose to do was to invite whatever representatives like Jessica and her colleagues to come to Washington County and experience what we have here and talk to the people that we have here. So they kind of penciled in the 18th of May as a time when these people would come down, and they put together a planning committee almost immediately. And what their intent is to set up some dog and pony show where all of the communities, Sabuck, Eastport, and Perry, have an opportunity to talk to these people when they come here, because apparently they're going to come here for pretty much a full day. So it's not clear where this is going to go. I mean, the planning is, I think it's still an early stage. I think Elaine is more plugged into this than I am. So I don't know what we're going to want to do or be asked to do, but we'll find out. I mean, I mentioned to the select board that their availability might be useful. but I don't know.
So I'm not entirely sure where this is at. It appears to be that one person seems to be spearheading this. So I'm not entirely sure of where this is going to go. Um, I just don't know at this point. Details or whatever. I know that they talked about like you said, Ray, visiting the communities, talking with people, broadband committees. And then because they had some interest in visiting Down East Broadband Utility, there was discussion about attending their board meeting. Oh, my dogs are gonna bark. Board meeting to learn more because apparently USDA isn't familiar with DBU. So there was some conversation about attending a board meeting as well. But it does appear to be that one of the Eastport Fiber Committee members and appears to be spearheading that. So I don't have any real details at this point outside of the 18th, and that's what it is that Eastport had pitched to USDA as an idea that if they came here, um, you
Right.
know, the only other thing I will say, in regards to USDA is just another funding mechanism. Uh, they are fairly uh, burdensome. Um, Grants to they're kind of a little unwieldy. Is that good, Chris? So they can be unwieldy. The other thing is the another opportunity might be is that to familiarize USDA with Washington County may not be such a bad idea uh, for if you're looking for other infrastructure projects that USDA does fund through grants and other opportunities.
Mhm.
Just it never hurts to familiarize the feds with Washington County, but as
And I got the impression, I mean, whether this is the time to have that conversation with them or whatever, but I got the impression that they're really looking to get a foothold in Maine. They recognize the rural
yes,
nature, but they don't have a lot of sort of
yes.
grantees, partly because their grant process sucks. But also it's just kind of that availability and the awareness and things like that. We're all learning a lot more about the grant world than I ever wanted to know. Um, so I think that's part of what they're looking to do and why they're interested. And it is a perfectly viable funding possibility. So personally, I would absolutely encourage conversations. The level of the planning, we'll kind of find out more at that meeting, I guess, of what they're intending. I love the idea to Elaine's point of having them up in the county, in the area, in Maine and stuff is a good thing. And I think they should be talking to some folks. I love them talking to DBU because getting an idea of how utility districts work for all of these agencies is valuable, and there are not many of them out there. So having those conversations on that side of things is very important. Whether Perry, any of you want to go attend that and see DBU is, entirely an optional choice and stuff. I certainly wouldn't feel compelled to, and you're not going to miss out on anything one way or another. But it's an interesting place to go look at and get an idea of what that, facility looks like. What does the model look like? Because if you're going to build something yourself, even if you're not doing the DBU, you're going to be building exactly the same thing as what you'd be seeing that day.
And as I was saying too, on a community-wide note, say for example, Perry is looking, I'm just making this up, to upgrade water lines or whatever, I'm just making this up. USDA is certainly a funding mechanism for something like that. So it doesn't hurt to have USDA here, get them to know Perry, Eastport, Sabayag, Callis, whatever. It doesn't hurt Washington County because I honestly don't know if they've been here before. I'm not sure.
I got the impression they didn't feel like they really had any,
Any
local
real
knowledge of
knowledge
Maine at
of,
all.
nope, none. So anyway, certainly I will keep you, Ray, informed. Chris gets looped into a lot of these planning type emails, but it's all very sketchy right now because it is several weeks away. But
Okay. Well, whatever I hear, you'll hear. So that's our line of communication. I think that's all I wanted to talk about.
Ray, did you reach back out to Melinda? Can
I
you
did.
about the ownership comments?
Well, I sent her back an email per our conversation telling her that we had a really difficult time in making sense out of the map that her people put together, and that we thought it would be advantageous if we had a chance to talk to some of the technical people. And I haven't heard from her since. So as far as I can see, the ball is in her court.
well, there was some conversation with Simon Thorne about. So let me just loop back, just step back just a little bit. That uh, next week was supposed to be someone from the National Digital Equity Center to come talk about free digital skills trainings and all that other, stuff, the digital equity stuff, free classes for folks and um, that sort of thing, which could still happen. But Ray, you were talking about, or you had been reaching out to CCI about asking them to meet with you guys again to further discuss uh, a possible partnership with them. So maybe the committee wants to discuss about meeting with CCI and Simon Thorne next week, or just so I know who I'm inviting. And
Right. You all think that's a good idea? I mean, the next week has to do with Simon's schedule, not ours. Pretty much the rest of the month we're not going to have available. So that's why we're thinking about maybe switching him with the digital equity person for next week's meeting. What do you think?
Yeah. That's a good idea.
Okay, so what I'd like to do, since this will probably be our best opportunity to try to get all the information we need for decisions on our part, I want all of us to start thinking about what questions we want to pin them down on. They could be simple questions, they could be complicated questions. I don't care. But what I want to do is I want to write all these things down so that each of us has the list of what information we want to be able to get to these people. And that's not only technical information, but it's financial information, it's management information, whatever else,
Yeah.
All right. So I'll probably be sending you emails during the course of the week, and hopefully we can put something together so that if Simon agrees to do this, hopefully he will, that we can get the information we need so that we can move forward if we want to do something specific with CCI. Does that make sense, Chris?
Yeah, absolutely. I would, if you have Simon's availability and this is kind of when he's available, I would say take advantage of it.
Yeah, good. Anything else we want to talk about?
Scott, did you want to anything?
No, I'm just a set of
You're right. Okay, so Ray, you're going to reach out to Simon Thorne and you'll let me know if he can do next Thursday so I can invite him to that.
Right.
And then once I know that, that he can attend, I'll just ask Marcy from the National Digital Equity Center for another date that will work for her.
Sure.
Perfect. I'll just wait to hear from you, Ray.
Okay. I mean, if she wants to do the 11th, that would be fine.
Yeah, I can ask. Let's
Okay.
see with Simon before I start messing around with schedules.
I'm going to write him an email as soon as we sign off.
Okay.
Thanks all for your participation.
Thank you. Good night.
Thank you.
Thank
Ray.
you.